Welcome everyone, this is Honest Restart, and as you may have heard, or maybe you haven't heard yet, there is a Switch revision that is coming. This is being reported by Bloomberg and it's being corroborated by other sources such as Eurogamer or Emily Rogers. Now, the whole deal with this Switch revision, we don't know what it's called yet. There are a whole bunch of rumors, hence the title. Maybe it'll be called Super Nintendo Switch or Nintendo Switch Pro or Nintendo Switch Plus. We do not know yet. There are some rumors suggesting some names and we'll be getting to that. We'll be talking about other rumors and pieces of information surrounding this device as well. But the basic report from Bloomberg is that this Nintendo Switch will have a 7-inch OLED screen. There will be no bezels. It'll be able to run games at 4K when docked, and it's coming in either September or October. But as I already alluded to, there are other rumors and pieces of information that have surfaced since that are giving us perhaps more perspective on what may be going on here with this system, but also maybe the actual games we could be seeing. Perhaps Donkey Kong, perhaps Metroid, perhaps Breath of the Wild 2 to launch with the system. We're going to be talking about all of that today. Now before we jump into things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on the screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over all the different rumors that have come out recently regarding the Nintendo Switch Pro, Donkey Kong, Metroid, and we'll bring it all together and sort of speculate on what it all means and what we could be seeing in the coming months. So going beyond the Bloomberg report of the Switch coming in either September or October, there's a few things that have come out. For example, we are getting information from a Spanish site known as Vandal, who's getting information from a Chinese accessory maker, and they've gotten information from them correctly before, about some things regarding this system. For example, they are reconfirming that it will be an OLED screen that'll be about 7 inches without a bezel. But they're also saying that instead of the little kickstand that we have on the current Switch, there will be kind of more like a long horizontal flap similar to a Microsoft Surface. I'll put an image here so you can get an idea of what I'm referring to. And behind that, similar to the kickstand, that's where the microSD card will be. So basically, just a bigger flap. Makes perfect sense. It'll work probably better than the little flimsy kickstand that we have on the current Switch. But going beyond that, apparently the dock itself will be a little bit thicker, perhaps because it'll have a little bit more in there, perhaps because it will be helping games to run at 4K when docked. But also apparently it will actually have usable 3.0 USB ports, which is great because the Switch itself currently and its dock only use up to 2.0 functionality, even though supposedly they could do more, but they don't. So this newer Switch will have better running USB ports, so you can get more done with that. And it will also apparently include an Ethernet port, which is pretty darn awesome because currently on the base Switch, while you can get a little dongle to connect an Ethernet port and that may offer more stability for your online games and such, it's still sort of bottlenecked. You can basically only get up to Wi-Fi speeds through this dongle. But through an Ethernet port, an actual true Ethernet port into this dock, well, we could be seeing far greater speed. So you could download games far quicker. You could basically maybe never have any issues with online connectivity. And this would be a massive improvement for this new Switch revision. And according to Vandal, this Switch Pro will be coming around November in Europe in very limited numbers. Now this suggests, if you assume the Bloomberg report to be true, that it's not going to be coming out at the exact same time across the world, but it's looking like Nintendo's just trying to get the system out as quickly as they can in all the different regions, and there's going to be a bit of a few month window there, which I think is entirely reasonable. And if this comes out in Europe by November, that would be in time to have it come out with a big launch game. And the big launch game we are referring to is Breath of the Wild 2, but that's just widespread speculation. But we'll get to that a little bit later, because there are quite a few other rumors that I want to get to first. So a few days ago, Emily Rogers tweeted this out. With Pokemon being a November release, I'm curious to see where Metroid fits into the schedule. Speculation. September to October might be a reasonable release window for Metroid. Samus Returns was a September title, other M and Federation were August titles. And as my good friend Rob also points out in the thread, Metroid Prime 3 was an August title as well. Point is, there's a history of Metroid coming out in either August or September, which makes a lot of sense considering that the Switch Pro could be coming out in either September or October as well. But the real news here is that Emily Rogers is just sort of corroborating the idea that, yes, Metroid is coming out this year. But what's interesting about the timing here is that, let's say we get Switch Pro in October, Metroid comes out in September or August, and maybe for that October time period, again, maybe we see Breath of the Wild too. I guess the point I'm getting at here with this rumor is that, thanks to Emily Rogers, we're getting a slightly better perspective on Nintendo's sort of software lineup throughout the year. But there are still more rumors. So here's a few from Nate Drake. Nate Drake, also known as Nate the Hate on YouTube, is a known industry insider, has gotten a lot of things right, has been talking about Switch Pro coming with DLSS 2.0, the ability to upscale games to 4K appropriately, and other things, of course, but basically he's been saying a few other things on Reset Era, so I'm gonna go ahead and share with you what that is. So one of the things is in reference to Donkey Kong on Nintendo Switch, so I'm gonna go ahead and read that here. Donkey Kong for Switch is similar to a UFO. Info on it may be getting conflated with a now cancelled DK project, and info from that may be leaking into the current project discussion, creating a muddy image of what the project is and creating confusion as to whether it is or isn't a 2D, 3D Donkey Kong game. So what I find really interesting about this is because from what I've heard personally, it's not entirely known what this game is going to be yet. Basically, anyone I've spoken to hasn't actually seen gameplay footage of this game. But as a lot of the reports have been, this is being made by EPD, potentially the Odyssey team, and if it's the Odyssey team, it would certainly make you scratch your head to think that it would just be a 2D Donkey Kong game. But of course, there's a lot of possibilities here that may still be the case. However, there was this rumor that came out from Zippo that we reported a few weeks ago, where he was saying a whole bunch of things, like there being a new Mario Kart, even though there are contradictory reports to that. He was saying that Breath of the Wild 2 will not be coming out this year, which now, thanks to the Switch Pro port, suggests otherwise. And he was also saying that the Donkey Kong game would be 2D, yet here, Nate Drake is sort of supporting what I've also heard, that we're not entirely sure if it's gonna be 2D or 3D yet. So it's just kind of interesting to sort of see that, and that could have some implications for the Switch Pro as well, because if this is a big, open 3D Donkey Kong game, that would surely be quite a showcase for the Switch Pro. At the same time, a beautiful side-scrolling Donkey Kong game would still be nice to see, and if it's in 4K with beautiful Donkey Kong fur, that still would be great. But either way, it's just something interesting to consider here as we move into the E3 time. Maybe we see this Donkey Kong game finally confirmed, and we know what sort of perspective and genre it is this June. We'll see. But we got another little thing here from Nate Drake. Super Switch was a name I heard a couple months ago, unsure if they actually chose it as the final branding. And what's interesting about that is that we've also seen a now taken down listing from Amazon of Mexico for a new Nintendo Switch Pro. So what is the name for this Switch revision? Is it Super Nintendo Switch? Is it New Nintendo Switch? Is it Switch Pro? Is it something else? Well, personally, I don't think it's any of these names. I think Super Nintendo Switch is a possibility. That may very well have been a name that they bounced around in the past. Perhaps that was a code name for the Switch. And it may very well end up being the case that that is a name, and it would be very cool. I think people will be very excited to see something like that. It would be very, very marketable. But at the same time, my counter argument for Nintendo using Super Nintendo Switch as a name is because it sort of implies next generation. For example, we had the Nintendo Entertainment System back in the day, the NES, and then the next generation, full-on new generation, was the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the SNES, the Super Nintendo. So the Super moniker sort of implied a full-on next generation. But this Switch revision is that, a Switch revision. All of your base Switch games will still be compatible with this other Switch revision. It's not a full-on next generation, at least from what we've heard. So if they go with the Super Nintendo Switch name, I think it would imply otherwise. Of course, we're also talking about systems from the late 80s and early 90s, so maybe that whole idea can be thrown out the window. We shall see. But on the note of this Amazon listing, there's no way it's going to be called both New Nintendo Switch and Pro. It's not going to be both of those things. It'll be one or the other. And I really doubt it'll be Nintendo Switch Pro because, well, there is the PlayStation 4 Pro, and that's just been the rumor. That's just been the name we've used to sort of describe what the system may be because we don't have an official name yet. As for New Nintendo Switch, it's certainly possible as well. Nintendo went with the new branding for the new Nintendo 3DS, and it worked out, I suppose. In my opinion, it was kind of confusing. I think they could have done something a lot better than that. And considering that they already used it and it had some success, they might use it again, but I also feel like with this Switch revision, they want to go even bigger than something like the new Nintendo 3DS in terms of success. I think this is actually meant to legitimately lengthen the life cycle of the Switch, and I think this system is going to be a much bigger deal than the new Nintendo 3DS was for the 3DS family. And in my opinion, while it's definitely possible Nintendo could go in that direction, I feel like there are better choices for names here. So the name I've been throwing around for like 2 years already is Nintendo Switch Plus. So my thinking behind that is, well, one, it implies that it's a mid-gen refresh. It implies that it is an improvement, a deluxe version with better enhancements such as perhaps 4K capabilities and other nice things like an Ethernet port and things of that nature. But it's also not confusing. If you say Nintendo Switch Plus, it's not nearly as confusing as, oh, I'm gonna get a new Nintendo Switch. Oh, when you say new Nintendo Switch, do you mean the original Switch but a new one of it, or do you mean the new Nintendo Switch? Nintendo Switch Plus, in my opinion, is just a far easier name to understand, and in general, people understand what plus means. It means a little bit more. And that's what I think this Switch revision is gonna be. It's gonna be a nice, enthusiast, deluxe version of the current Switch, a plus version of the Switch, but still the Switch, and I think that's a very easily marketable name. Of course, that is just my speculation. This is nothing I've actually heard in the behind the scenes. This is not based off any report or rumor. It's just what I think makes sense. But I'll point out that I had similar thinking with the Nintendo Switch Lite before that was announced, and I was right. Not saying I'll be right again, but you know, I'm putting my speculation out there, reminding you guys that that's what I'm sort of banking on for the name, so we shall see. But if it ends up being Super Nintendo Switch, I'll be fine with that, because that's a pretty epic sounding name. Now, when is the system coming out? September or October, according to Bloomberg. I think in Japan and in the States, I can sort of see the system coming out in October, probably late October. Why? Because the later into the year, the easier for it to all come out. And if we're getting reports from Vandal that maybe it's going to come out in November for Europe, perhaps it'll be better if the system is coming out within a smaller sort of window across the globe as opposed to divided by a couple months. Not to mention, if we're getting a side-scrolling Metroid game in around August or September, I feel like that's not going to be the game Nintendo will use to push the hardware here. So definitely, I don't see Metroid coming out in September with a Switch revision. Either Metroid comes out in September and Switch revision comes out in October, or if the Switch revision comes out in September, Metroid comes out in August. Personally, I don't see them coming out in the same month, or at least not at the same day. They'll be divided by a few weeks. Instead, what I think will be the big launch title for this 4K capable Switch is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, or whatever the sequel is going to actually be called. This is a big game we've been waiting for. This is the game that will showcase the capabilities of this 4K Switch. That's going to probably be the best looking game Nintendo has ever actually made. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be exciting. It's the kind of game that would push hardware. Nintendo always uses Zelda to push hardware. When the Nintendo Switch Lite came out, what did we get? Link's Awakening Remake. When we got the actual Nintendo Switch itself, Breath of the Wild. When we got the Wii Motion Plus, Skyward Sword. When we got the new Nintendo 3DS, Majora's Mask 3D. When we got the Nintendo Wii, Twilight Princess. There's a very clear pattern and trend here. Zelda is what Nintendo uses to push hardware. And with that in mind, I feel like a later October release around the time of Halloween, since this is going to be a darker Zelda, a few weeks before Pokemon, so there's a bit of a healthy gap there, but also in time to get this system out there for Black Friday. I think it makes perfect sense. We've seen Nintendo push big holiday games in October before, like Luigi's Mansion 3 and Super Mario Odyssey. This is my bet. October with Breath of the Wild 2, I think that makes the most sense. A month or two beforehand, we'll get a nice quality Metroid game, and there may be more coming after that. Because if in October we're getting Breath of the Wild 2 with this Switch revision, and in November we're getting Pokemon, perhaps there's time to get something in late November or early December, another quality game here. What could that be? Well, maybe it's this Donkey Kong game, and maybe it's a game Nintendo would like to put out there to showcase the system, and it would certainly help to further push hardware. Absolutely, definitely possible. Of course, this Donkey Kong game could easily be something that Nintendo would save for a later date for sure. Maybe Nintendo fits something else into that December time period. Maybe Bayonetta 3, maybe a new Xenoblade game or something else from Monolith Soft, or something else entirely different. It's also entirely possible Nintendo doesn't put anything in December because they don't need to, but they absolutely could. It is looking like they are going to stockpile the second half of the year and the beginning of 2022 with a lot of games to support this new hardware, as Nintendo usually does with all their big hardware releases. Just look at 2019, just look at 2017. This is how Nintendo handles things. When they have new hardware, there will be a lot of software to come out to support it. Either way though, it is looking like we're going to be getting an announcement for this Switch revision before E3, so that way third parties can start showcasing their games running on the Switch revision for all of their personal E3 announcements. So I guess it does make sense from that perspective, and that's exciting because I would love to see what this revision is going to be, and maybe they'll give us some sort of first look, sort of like trailer where we get some snippets of gameplay of maybe Breath of the Wild 2 and this new Donkey Kong or Metroid, and then they're fully featured and then showcased in an E3 Direct a few weeks from now. We shall see what happens. This is all rumor technically because it hasn't been officially confirmed by Nintendo, but it's one of those things where I definitely believe it, and I think it's just a matter of when. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.